now is, the expectation is, you do it without question. Selfless service. All right, can anyone tell me what it means by selfless service? Putting the nation welfare above all else. Putting your subordinate soldiers before yourself. All right, you are now entering an organization that is much larger than yourself. All right, you're serving your country. All right, you're doing your duty loyally, all right, and without thought of gaining recognition or any kind of awards. You go out there and you do it because it is the right thing to do. The basic building blocks of selfless service is the commitment of each team member to go a little farther and endure a little bit more for each other. It is that simple. Let me tell you a little story about a young lieutenant that I met when I was over in Iraq. And it was interesting because when you get together, you know, sergeant majors have a whole bunch of stories. We tell stories all the time. Matter of fact, I think it is actually public law that sergeant majors are allowed to tell stories. All right? Somebody needs to look that up. But we managed to get together, a whole bunch of the engineer sergeant majors. We managed to get together in Camp Victory outside of Baghdad. And we're sitting there, we're tired. And it was interesting. One of the brigade commanders' convoy came in for a meeting. And it was interesting because there was a young lieutenant that was part of the convoy. And normally platoon leaders are not part of the convoy for the commander. And I was just reminiscing with Mike Bucksbaum, a good friend of mine, sergeant major actually of the Corps of Engineers. And we were talking about how young these officers look nowadays. And I was like, Mike, they're not young, we're old. You know, you got to think about that. And he goes, you know what? He said, we put so much on these young leaders nowadays. It is amazing from what the time we grew up. And he went on to tell me that there's this young lieutenant, right, that was involved in an ambush where he had about 5 of his soldiers that were wounded. And some of them were evac to Germany, some of them eventually got evac to line school. What was interesting, as he was telling me his story, he was telling me about this blog this young lieutenant was keeping for all the family members inside of his platoon. Some of the wives who was back home in Germany, some of the wives who was home in the States. For the single soldiers, it was the mom and dads back in the States. Well, when you're touring in Iraq, as well as Afghanistan, you usually get a 2-week leave to go home, unwind, relax. And this young lieutenant went back to Germany, picked up his wife, visited all the families of the wounded soldiers that were still in Germany, visited soldiers inside the hospital at Ramstein Air Force Base. After he visited them, he got on an airplane, he flew to Washington, D.C. with his wife, and they went and visited the soldiers and the families of those soldiers at Walter Reed. The families that were not at Walter Reed, once he visited with his soldier, then he went and visited their family members. And then he went back to Germany and deployed back to Iraq. This is how this young lieutenant felt about his soldiers. He spent his entire leave looking out for them. That is a perfect example of selfless service. Nobody asked him. He didn't ask for recognition. He did it because it was the right thing to do. All right? That's just a good example of what kind of leaders that your sons and daughters, our greatest asset, is going to wind up being led by. All right? That's a true testament of selfless service.